Let me add my welcome to the other welcomes that people have had. If you don't know me, my name is Matt. I'm one of the pastors here at Hobart Baptist Church. Enlarge the place of your tent. Stretch your tent curtains wide. Do not hold back. Lengthen your cords. Strengthen your stakes. Isaiah 54:2. Some people might be wondering what that's all about. We'll come back to it later. So, welcome to week 3 of our Vision series here at Hobart Baptist Church. We've called it Welcome, and we're looking at our aspirational values through the lens of welcome. So Stephen kicked us off with learning to live like Jesus in Hobart. And last week we heard from Sean about creatively expressing our faith. This week we're going to be talking about nurturing a brave space. One of the things that most excited me when I first came to Hobart Baptist Church at the beginning of the year was one of the first times I sat down with Stephen and we talked about what kind of a church community he wanted to have. It was still he at that point. It wasn't us yet. It became us pretty quick. And Stephen started talking about this idea of a brave space. And I found that really exciting. Georgie, by the way, are there slides? Okay, cool, thank you. I found the idea of a brave space really, really exciting. But I didn't fully understand why at the time. I didn't fully understand why the idea was so exciting to me. Anyway, as I came to learn more about what Stephen meant by a brave space, I found it really exciting to talk to people about it. But I often found that people misunderstood. So I would talk about how, at HBC we want to create a brave space. And people would say, oh yeah, safe space, that's good. And I would say, no, that's not what we mean. We mean a brave space. And then I'd have to explain what it meant. Right up front, I want to acknowledge that some of the things we're going to talk about today might push some people's buttons. Brave spaces can be scary spaces. They're not safe spaces. Brave spaces require us to risk and to go into the unknown. So if you're feeling a little bit reticent about that, that's okay. We'll do it together. Before we can talk about brave spaces, we need to talk about what a safe space is, so we understand what we're not. So what is a safe space? A safe space is a place intended to be free of bias, conflict, criticisms, or potentially threatening actions, ideas, or conversations. It's a mouthful. The origins, I've been doing research on this and it's really interesting. The origins of safe spaces are actually hard to pin down. Some people say that there's not agreement. Some people say they originated with the women's liberation movement of the 1960s. Some people say they originated with the gay and lesbian liberation movement. And then other people say, actually, they're much older than that. And they date back to the work of psychologist Kurt Lewin in the 1940s. So I found that really interesting because I thought they were a fairly new thing, but apparently not. If we're in a space... The safe space concept is good. I'm not here to rubbish it. There is a place for safe spaces. There are times when we need a safe space. So I don't want anyone, please, don't take any critique I might offer this morning of safe spaces as me saying shouldn't have them, because I'm not. They sound great, particularly for children. They sound wonderful, to be free of bias, to be free of conflict, free from criticism or from threatening actions, ideas or conversations. It does sound really good and the intentions are good. But I have a question, and that is it actually good? I think one of the reasons why I was so excited when Stephen talked about wanting a brave space was because I've actually been uncomfortable with the idea of safe spaces for quite some time. But I couldn't put my finger on why. And I think I'm beginning to get it. So I want to try some ideas out on you. I want to ask some questions and see how we all feel. I guess I'll find out when I get the questions later. I think my discomfort with safe spaces is because I'm not actually sure that they're welcoming. And I'm not actually sure that they're inclusive. And I've got to say, and I think it's not a surprise to people who know me, inclusion is a really big deal to me. Inclusion is at the very heart of my theology. God has put inclusion at the very centre of my life. So I grew up with a sister who has a disability. I'm married to a beautiful woman who has a vision impairment. 2 of my sons are on the autism spectrum. Inclusion really matters to me. It's not something that's off on the side like I think it is for some people. For me, it's right at the centre. And it's at the very centre of my vision of God. It's funny, back in, was it September we went to Launceston, Stephen? Back in September at the pastor's muster, we were invited to articulate our personal vision of God. How do you see God? It's a really interesting exercise to do. And I actually found it really formative. It's always good when you can get up on stage and talk about how good a PD was when your boss is just there. It's great. So anyway, I came up with, well, actually, I wrote a whole heap of stuff, but I'm not going to bore you with that. The crux of what I came up with was, I believe in a God who wants to include everyone in the story and has done everything necessary to make that happen. So here are some questions I've got bearing that in mind. If we're in a space that's free from conflict, where's the room for me to disagree? Or, to flip that around, where's the room for me to have my ideas challenged if we have to be free from conflict? What exactly is a threatening idea or conversation? And who decides? When we think about that, then I come back to my question that I asked earlier. Is a safe space welcoming? If we're putting down rules where we say, can't talk about this, can't talk about this, can't talk about this, these people aren't welcome because they believe this or whatever, is it actually welcoming? And is it inclusive? Or is it exclusive? Does everyone have access? Or are people locked out and unwelcome? And is it actually healthy to be free from critique or challenge? Is that good for us? And if the answers to any of those questions are no, then we have to think about that, I think. Here at HBC, we want a brave space. See, we got there eventually. What is a brave space? It's very different from a safe space. In a brave space, questions are welcome, even hard questions, even controversial questions. They're welcome. You're allowed to ask. It's okay. Ideas are open to be challenged and questioned. People take responsibility for their own feelings, but also for their own actions. And we have mutual respect. And because we're having mutual respect, it's okay to have our ideas challenged because we're not being attacked as a person. We want to respect each other. It's really key. I want to create a culture here where everyone is welcome with no strings attached, because that's what inclusion actually looks like. That's what welcome looks like. And God is all about inclusion and welcome. So in Isaiah 54:2, we see God talking about how he's going to enlarge the nation of Israel and how they need to be ready to have a bigger idea of themselves. Enlarge the place of your tent. Stretch your tent curtains wide. Make space. Make room. Don't hold back. Lengthen your cords. But then God reminds them, strengthen your stakes. In other words, get ready to grow as a people and get ready to have a larger picture of what Israel is, but have strong foundations. Strengthen your stakes. I am a huge fan of things in Scripture that have more than one meaning in application. I think just as God was talking to the people of Israel then, there's a message in this for us now. Because we need to have a bigger idea of what it means to be church together. And when I say church, I don't mean the building, and I don't even mean 10 a.m. on a Sunday. I mean our community. We need to have a bigger idea of what that is. We need to enlarge the place of our tent. We need to stretch our tent curtains wide, not hold back. So let's make sure we're making space in our church for community. The space for new people in their questions and their ideas doesn't happen automatically or accidentally. It requires intentionality. We've actually got to make it happen. We have to make space. It requires commitment and risk, because sometimes questions might get asked that hurt our feelings, and we have to be bigger than that. So, are we open to questions here? I think it's something worth asking ourselves. Even if they're uncomfortable, are we open to being made uncomfortable? Are we ready to make room for different opinions and ideas? Are we ready to disagree well? Speak the truth in love? Are we prepared to have our own worldview challenged even? Are we prepared for that? Because if we've done the work to have strong foundations for our faith, it can handle that. It can handle being questioned. It's like the parable where Jesus talks about the man who built his house on the sand. It didn't have strong foundations, and what happened to it? It didn't last long. And just like that, if our faith isn't built on strong foundations, then we'll have trouble. If we think about brave spaces through the lens of welcome, then I think this verse from Isaiah rings really true. In the book of Matthew in chapter 4, Jesus begins to preach. And he says, "Repent, for the kingdom of heaven has come near." This is another time where I can get brownie points from the boss. At the pastor's muster, Stephen shared this thing with us that blew my mind. And that was that this verse, Matthew 4:17, "Repent, for the kingdom of heaven has come near," is not a great translation of what Jesus actually said. Jesus uses the word metanoia. Am I pronouncing that right? Yep, metanoia. Which is actually a combination of two words, meta and noia. This is your audience participation time. What does the word meta mean? Someone knows. What does it mean? Yeah, to have bigger, beyond. Does anyone know what the word noia means? So, where it comes from, yeah. That one's harder. I didn't know what that one meant. So, perception, understanding, mind. That verse feels really different if we say it like this. Get a bigger way of thinking, for the kingdom of heaven has come near. Does that feel really different? Get a bigger way of thinking. Think bigger. Broaden your understanding. Think beyond. Enlarge the place of your tent. This is our call to welcome bravely, because we follow a God who's all about inclusiveness, so we should be too. Last week, Sean talked about seeing people the way God sees them. And this is so key. I was so glad that Sean talked about that. It meant that I didn't have to talk about it. Because all too often, those of us in the established church are too concerned, I think, with whether people are in or not. Sometimes it feels like we expect people to show up at church, new people I mean, already fully formed, fully committed Christians with their lives sorted out, with good theology and ready to conform themselves to the norms of our community. And that is not how it works. It just doesn't work that way. Church communities, and especially leaders, can find it really hard to deal with making space for people who don't fit into our paradigms, into our boxes. I find it hard to figure out. We even have some people here in our church community who, because of their work, doesn't fit the normal church paradigm. We don't see them every week. And for church leaders, that doesn't work. But whose problem is it? It's the leader's problem. It's not that person's problem. So we need to be able to think outside our paradigms, not expect everybody to fit. As a lot of people who know me well would know, I'm a huge fan of U2. I've got some there we go. I'm a huge fan of U2. I think everybody probably knows who U2 are. Just recently, Bono put out a book, and I've been slowly working my way through it and really enjoying it. If you don't know, the 4 members of U2 are all Christians, but they're not a Christian band. How's that work? Well, back when they first started their band, only 3 members of the band were Christians. And in Ireland, where they come from, religion is a touchy topic. They're not all from the same denomination. Some of them were Catholic and some of them were Protestants, but they were friends anyway. That is not normal in Ireland, particularly in the late 1970s. Anyway, they didn't want to be limited by the paradigm of being called a Christian band. They wanted to conquer the world, and they knew they couldn't do that if they were put in that box. Also, one of them wasn't a Christian. Anyway, after they put out their first record, they went on their first big tour to America. And it was mildly successful. And they were really excited when they came back. They were members, 3 of them, were members of a small, non-denominational church community called Shalom. And they were so excited to come back to their church community for a couple of reasons. One, they'd been in America for a few months and they missed their friends. But the other reason was they'd made some money and they wanted to contribute to the finances of the church. They'd never been able to do it. They were poor musicians. So they were really excited. So they came back to Dublin. But when they turned up to Shalom, the leaders there pulled them aside and told them they didn't want a rock band in their church community. They told these young 20-something guys, early 20s guys, that if you want to stay here in this church, you have to either be a Christian band, or you have to stop being a band. And for about 3 weeks, these young guys agonised over this because, they didn't want to leave their church community. Well, in the end, they did. They wanted to be in the band. So they left their church community. And there are a couple of sad things about that. First of all, that church community, which didn't have a big enough idea of itself to be able to accommodate people who were different, didn't survive much longer. The other thing that's sad is that these young guys had now lost their Christian community and they never found another one. They had to build their own. And Bono's angst about that comes out in a lot of U2 songs, but there's one in particular from the early 90s, a song where Bono says in the lyric, "I'd break bread and wine if there was a church that I could receive in." They were not made welcome. Jesus pulled his followers from all sections of society. There were fishermen, there was a tax collector, there was a revolutionary zealot. I bet he and the tax collector got along really well. There was a thief. Paul was a Pharisee. These were people who should not have been able to be in community together, shouldn't have been able to work, and they certainly didn't fit into anyone's paradigm of what would make a religious community at that time. But these were the people Jesus pulled together. He associated with people who were actually bad for his image. We see pictures, we see places in the 4 Gospels where people criticise him. Why are you hanging out with these deadbeats over here? It makes you look bad. Next week, we'll be talking about belonging. A brave space welcomes people in from right across the spectrum of our society. And it doesn't worry about whether they look like us, whether people will talk about us behind our backs if they see us with them. A brave space doesn't try to fit people into boxes. A brave space doesn't try to lock people in or shut people out. Enlarge the place of your tent. Stretch your tent curtains wide. Don't hold back. Lengthen your cords. Strengthen your stakes. So we heard it from Fiona earlier. I was trying to think of a wonderful prayer to close with this morning, but I can't write something better than this. Maybe it might be heard a little differently now. Together, we'll create a brave space. Because there is no such thing here as a safe space. We exist in the real world. We all carry scars, and we've all caused wounds. In this space, we seek to turn down the volume of the outside world. We amplify voices that fight to be heard elsewhere. We call each other to more truth and more love. We have the right to start somewhere and continue to grow, but we have the responsibility to examine what we think we know. We will not be perfect. This space will not be perfect. It will not always be what we wish it to be, but it will be our brave space together, and we will work on it side by side.
Thanks, Matt.
We're using the stools, aren't we?
So,
I should have already got them out.
Thank you for those who have texted in a couple of questions. Oh, we're going to go up here, are we? Okay. So I've got a few questions, Matt. Yeah.
I figured.
Yep. Okay, you talk about, we'll go back, safe spaces, and you said how they're good.
Yes.
They can be good, so they're not... the community doesn't see the church as safe. So what do we do about that? We can't even be a safe space.
Yeah, that's interesting. I would question whether, if we are going to talk about the sort of stuff that we need to talk about as Jesus representatives, I'm not sure we can label ourselves as a safe space. You might have a different opinion on that. I'd be interested to hear. But I'm
not answering the question.
I'm guessing that's why you chose Brave in the first place. Because I'm not sure we could be honest if we're promising to never be controversial or never challenging or never critique, because that's part of what happens.
And yet, at the same time, people need some level of safety. This is my question coming up. So how do you do a level of safety in a brave space?
That's a great question. I think it comes from the idea of mutual respect.
Yep.
So there's this idea that I will take responsibility for my actions, and I'll take responsibility for my feelings, and I'll respect you. So it's okay to challenge your idea because I'm not challenging you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Thank you. So you mentioned that you've been at this church for nearly all this year. So what's that, 9 months? You survived 9 months, you and Kylie have?
We've survived.
So can you give an example of having to be brave in this space?
I think I can give an example, and I know he won't mind because we've talked about it a bit. An example of how I've seen someone welcomed in a brave way is our friend William over there, who came with questions, lots of questions, and still has them. And he was provided a space where it was okay.
But that's not talking about you. I asked about you, whether you...
Well, you put up with me. No, I think that we've been able to, this year, I can't speak for other years because obviously I wasn't here, we've been able to talk about a lot of pretty big stuff this year. And the fact that we would, as the people bringing the teaching or the messages, have felt the permission to do that here speaks a lot to the bravery of the space and the community.
Still didn't answer my question, but I'll let you get away.
I do have a political background.
I know, you're playing it very well then. I would have thought, Matt, the fact that you've come amongst us and happy to pick up with the narrative that we're going on and being brave in that, I've certainly seen you being brave, even if you don't own it yourself. So, talking about the brave space, what do you think is some of our biggest challenges to be the space that you're talking about, that you sense that we need to be?
Yeah, I knew I'd get a question like this. So I think for us, one of the big things comes back to that conversation I was having about trying to fit people into boxes. Mm-hmm. And so being ready to accept people who come, even if they just really don't fit our idea of who should be showing up at church. The simple fact is they're here. If they've come, that's awesome and we want them to stay. So that means needing to have a bigger idea of what it means to welcome people in. And I think we do pretty well with that here, but it doesn't mean that we just decide, oh, that's good, we don't need to worry about that anymore. I think it's a constant thing that requires intentionality at all times to be welcoming and accepting of new people who come in and of people who have questions.
Thank you. I've got one more. This one's mine. Why would we even bother to do the hard work to be a brave space? Why would we do it?
Well, wow, that's a good question. How long have we got? There's a multi-layered question. So first of all, because Jesus did.
Yep.
So that's the best answer to any question is Jesus did it, yep. So we should do it. But outside of that, if we just want to think in purely sort of realistic nuts and bolts thinking, do we want to have a church in 20 years? Because if we do, then we've got to be welcoming and we've got to be open to the idea that there are people out there in Hobart who might want to be part of a church community, who aren't yet, who don't actually fit our current idea of what we think it should look like.
That sounds good. And a lot of people who are spiritually searching and trying to find a place to do it.
Absolutely.
And I'm answering my own question. But the community doesn't see us as a safe place to come.
No, and part of the reason for that is because, I'm not saying it's happened here, but in the capital C church, there have been lots of people who have been made to not feel welcome. So it's an area that needs to be an area of focus for us.
Yep, great. Thanks, Matt.
Thank you.
Appreciate that.